Okay, now new face in front of you. Welcome back after the break. And we unfortunately have to tell you that Jens Scholar, who was intended to do this upcoming speech, could not make it here on very short notice, but there is someone replacing him. And we are very happy that Max Cartellieri, who we just have seen in our panel discussion, very spontaneously agreed on taking his place for the upcoming speech. Welcome. He started his career in strategy consulting. He did some entrepreneurial work, he did some PE work, and he'll now tell you about, well, let's be surprised.
We'll see, yeah.
We'll see. This gives plenty of room for lively discussion afterwards. So we are very happy to have him here on very short notice.
Perfect. Well,
floor is yours.
Thank you. I think the way to organize a good conference is to keep the best for last, and I'm not sure you've succeeded this time around having me not here, but I'll try to give my best at least, see where we come out. I've I don't know, no agenda basically. What I thought we could do is I'll try to explain to you what we do as a business, because I think that's not necessarily obvious. And I think we approach it with a pretty interesting and hopefully kind of stimulating angle. I'm going to give you a few slides that we did 3 months ago in New York at a conference. But then I thought it's probably more interesting, I hope at least for you too, hear a little bit how I went through the last, literally now 20 years. I graduated in 1994 from the LSE, and I started in management consulting, then I spent a year in private equity, then I started my first company, kind of changed around a little bit. And now hiring a lot of people out of university, I can see myself in a lot of the people I interview basically, with the same questions and also with the same almost naive approach in some ways, thinking about their career, when I think with a little bit of hindsight, one can think smartly in a more informed way about it. So let me run through these slides, give you a better understanding of what we do, but then I'd love to open it up and just try to give some career guidance to you if I can be, perhaps. Okay. I've got several things here. I don't know which ones to use. Does this work? Yes. Okay. Good. Perfect. Now, before I do that, what do we do at AlphaSights? I think the best way to express in one sentence, and it's taken us 7 years to get here, there, is to say we connect the world's thinking. And what that means is, you've got hundreds of millions of professionals out there in the world, and all of them at certain points not only face knowledge gaps, where they're encountering something that they don't know yet, but very often, actually, they face the same problems that other people have faced before, or they face problems that other people, by way of their daily life, are extremely well informed about. And so when you think about it like that, there's enormous arbitrage or market-making opportunity by bringing together these two parties, the ones seeking knowledge and the ones having knowledge. And that, in a nutshell, is what we do. Sounds like an interesting or perhaps strange business, but when you think about it, it's like the oldest thing in the world, basically. Everyone who has a question. You guys are probably too young to remember driving in a car without sat-nav, but I remember driving around and you end up somewhere in an area where you don't know your way around. First thing is lower the window and ask people for advice. It's very natural, I think, it's most human things to ask someone else who seems better informed for advice. What's exciting, I think, is when you think about it, that digital connectivity, which has only come into existence in the last 10 or 20 years, is creating a global playing field for essentially doing the same thing, connecting people very, very quickly around a challenge that someone faces. And when you, again, take almost like a philosophical perspective to it, the amount of innovation and progress that must unleash by being able to put together people who know something and making their brains connect around a challenge that someone faces, rather than having that person try to solve the challenge in isolation, which is literally, the way humanity's done it for the last a few thousand years. Suddenly we can harvest or leverage that collective wisdom or that connected intelligence, whatever you want to call it. And so we are very excited also from that level about what we do, because we see the impact that the decisions that we facilitate are having, not just in the business field, but also in areas such as non-profit institutions that we support in the work they do in Africa, for example, around epidemic prevention and so on. You suddenly very, very quickly connect people who otherwise wouldn't be connected, and they drive knowledge forward. So that's in a nutshell what we do. I'll talk a little bit perhaps about the company later, but the way we've tried to now understand what knowledge actually is along this graph here. And I'm going to turn around here. Don't know whether you can read it, but essentially think of the axis here as a passage of time, and your brain engages with a problem, and you're trying to essentially understand that and reach a higher level of understanding. And kind of the axis goes up, there is your thinking in terms of the quality of your thinking or your ability to arrive at an answer and create a novel thought that hasn't existed in that form before. And at some point, after a lot of thought has been thrown at the problem, you have that famous light bulb moment or the flash of insight or whatever you want to call it, where you say you've cracked the problem. And that's essentially also what all innovation is about. Someone coming up with whatever the next Salesforce.com or so is figuring out, okay, lots of companies around the world have the problem of having to sell. How do they do that today? Well, they have purchased CRM software. So could we not do that in a different way? And so smart people, that's a process of innovation out in entrepreneurship, apply their thinking to the world around them and suddenly come up with a better mousetrap, basically. So that's when the better mousetrap gets born up there. What happens then is, if you truly have the better mousetrap, everyone else in the world and ever-increasing speed will learn about the better mousetrap that you've invented. Some famous alumni from this very school here are, as you know, famous at copying business models within a split second. Anything that's invented in the Valley or something is now rolled out successfully by Rocket Internet around the world. And, I think it's great. They do that very, very successfully, but it's again just saying, someone has had a light bulb moment, let's copy that and let's do it in what other markets, basically. So that's kind of the way we think about the birth and ultimately the death of knowledge, or the death of the value of knowledge, because the moment gets out and gets codified and is shared around the world, it loses its competitive edge, basically. So the moment that just puts more status behind it, but it gets codified. So first, knowledge always resides in people's minds. It's tacit, and it's the famous light bulb moment. Then it gets codified, which means put into words, and thereby it becomes bits and bytes, and you can essentially disseminate it very, very quickly. And then it gets broadly adopted. And the value of the knowledge to the person who had that light bulb moment keeps going down with the amount of adoption by other people, basically. So it's no longer exclusive. What's happening, thanks to the web basically, is that this process of dissemination adoption is speeding up the whole time, which means you have ever less time to actually, to exploit your competitive window of your innovation or your light bulb moment, basically, because that, the phasing of people hearing about it, codifying it, copying it, dealing with it, is ever increasing. So that's why the world is speeding up around us, basically. Take the extreme moment, this is in New York, we get this presentation where we had hedge funds there. Take the extreme moment of the time that a press or earnings release comes out, 4 o'clock in the afternoon in New York, basically, within a split second, the fact that whatever Facebook has $1.09 earnings or something that quarter is immediately disseminated and incorporated in the price. And we're talking about milliseconds, and the big funds co-hosting their servers near to the New York Stock Exchange in order to get that split-second advantage over the others to exploit the value of that not yet fully disseminated information. So essentially, that's where on the right side, literally speaking of the curve, you're in the area of low latency trading, where you want to really minimize split seconds of execution power. And on the left side, you're in the famous world of insider trading, which sends you into prison because you actually have the knowledge and act on it before it's been released. But you can see the battle for getting a competitive knowledge advantage ahead of someone else is really the battle of the knowledge economy. Is that a novel thing? No, of course not. It's been around for a long time, and that's where the whole patent system comes into play, which is under big criticism around the world now, because essentially what a patent does, it gives you the ability to exploit the knowledge, even though other people know about it, but you're allowed to have exclusivity around it and keep the value high. And that's why patents are so valuable, and you now see that the Motorola deal by Google and so on, that's only buying the patents that Motorola used to have, in order to keep out competitors. And the whole game now between the Samsung and the Apples and the Googles of this world is a battle for patents and kind of keeping people out with lawsuits in order to extract maximum value from your innovation, basically. That's the most famous case probably of where the law of kind of adaptation and dissemination doesn't happen is actually Google in itself. Because if you think what happened in 1998, Larry and Zach had the light bulb moment of coming up with a superior algorithm. But the algorithm, even though it is public in the sense that everyone uses the output of it, gets better and better and better over time by the very fact that we use it. Everything we do, every search we do helps them improve the algorithm, and as a consequence, it becomes a virtual monopoly basically. And even though it's something others in theory could copy and have tried to copy, and Microsoft has thrown billions at it, you can't really copy it. So it's a clearly a natural monopoly, that business model, because it doesn't follow the law of essentially dissemination, adaptation. They're protected from competition. Now, the more common cases, companies such as Apple, in 2007 they come out with the iPhone, and it's amazing, amazing innovation. And there's a little anecdote around Steve Jobs back then announcing the iPhone in January 2007 to a developer conference and essentially showing a prototype. And the people at BlackBerry up in Canada hear it and say, that just cannot be. You can't have all that functionality put into such a small thing, because the computing power would take up the entire space of the phone, because the battery power would take up the entire space of the supposed phone. So how would you do that? It won't work. So 6 months later, the actual phone comes out, and the first thing they do at BlackBerry is take it apart and figure out 80% of the iPhone was the battery power. But what Apple had managed to do was to miniaturize all the actual processing into the remaining 20% of the thing. So they kind of turned the traditional way you would build a mobile phone on its head, where 80% was taken up by the actual processing and 20% was the battery. They just turned this around. And by that creating a new ecosystem which is now producing, 18 billion in quarterly profits. Now the problem is, it doesn't take BlackBerry too long to figure out the trick basically after they've unraveled the phone. So what you have to do is you have to keep innovating, keep innovating, keep innovating. And you have to come out, even if you have the most amazing mousetrap, on one day, unless you keep coming up with better mousetraps, you'll be history basically. So that's the typical case, and therefore I think the ultimate game in winning today in the knowledge economy, independent of what business you're in, is creating a culture of innovation where you're just, the way the DNA of your firm is such that you're always a little bit faster and think a little bit more smartly than the competition. And that ultimately comes back to then having better people, having more motivated people, but also having more connected thinking. Because if you only kind of zoom in on the problem from your own perspective, you fall for groupthink, cognitive biases, and you only have very, very limited perspectives. There's a famous quote by Bill Joy, one of the founders of Sun Microsystem. I think it's called now Joy's Law. 99% of the smartest people in the world don't work for you. And it's very true, even if you're Apple, even if you're Google. 99% of the smartest people in the world do not work for you. So you're missing all that wisdom that's out there. And what we're about, and what our vision is for our firm, is to make at least some kind of contribution to the fact that you can now tap that knowledge, and you can actually benefit from it much more quickly than you could in the past. So that's roughly kind of the underpinning of what we do. So let me spend two more minutes on AlphaSights and then kind of unravel the story backwards how we got there. So AlphaSights, my co-founder and I started conceptually in 2007 at the top of the last cycle. We actually ended up being in business in the summer of 2008, a few weeks before Lehman went belly up, when the circumstances suddenly looked very, very different, and people said, and you want to be selling to hedge funds? Well, good luck with that business plan. So it was an interesting time, but it was, in hindsight, probably a good time to start, because there was a total hiring freeze by most investment banks, most consulting firms. It allowed us to really attract great talent, literally on day one, and build a firm that is committed essentially to understanding our clients' problem. And our clients are private equity firms. The top 10 firms now are using us. The large consulting firms are using us. The hedge fund sector, or the kind of the public securities investors use us. But more and more also now strategy professionals and business developers and large corporations are using us. So they buy a subscription to our service, and then they call us, and they will speak to any one of our now 250 people around the world, and have a human intelligent person to speak with, namely a very, very smart, highly educated graduate who really gets it. Who doesn't just say, okay, it's about online advertising in Spain, push a button, here's someone online advertising in Spain, but who really understands what the problem is and what the knowledge gap is that our client is facing, and then we put the phone down, and the capability we've developed as a firm is that that person who was briefed by the client will spend the next 24 to 48 hours being on the phone, identifying people, finding them via Google, finding them via LinkedIn, getting referrals, speaking to people, engaging them, telling them, why they may want to talk to our client or why they may not want to talk to our client, and vetting them and assessing really are these just people who say, yeah, pay me some money, I'll talk to your client, or they're truly insightful people, and that's the skill set. And the skill set is no longer what it was like 10 years ago, was finding people. Anyone can find people now, the world will be one big phone book. The question is assessing and vetting and making the right match, basically. And doing that intellectually right, but also doing it legally right, because there's a lot of course, risk in matching knowledge, and being you have to be very, very careful that you don't infringe on trade secrets, that you don't infringe or have issues with economic espionage, so even state secrets, that you're very careful about insider trading and these kind of things. So what we've built is essentially a clean room environment where both parties, both our client but also the advisor, before they actually speak to one another or connect with one another, have to make literally 10 or 20 declarations of how they're going to behave and what knowledge they will share and what knowledge they won't share. And clients love that because they come to us and within 48 hours typically of a request or so, they will have a great short list of like truly 5 super or 10 super relevant people they should talk to. And it's when you think about that, you're professional or the private equity firm, you're looking at explosion protection. Actually, I remember I had prepared this for the panel, my team looked at that. Around one deal last year, we delivered 238 interactions, we call it, so either meetings or talks or phone calls between our clients, private equity firms and industry experts. 26 so-called ended up in exclusivities, which is where the private equity firm after the call says, I want to work with that person exclusively and take them on my book basically in order to win the deal. Of the 238 interactions we set up, 125 were for the sponsors directly for the private equity firms and 113 were for the consulting firms. So even the consulting firms these days, all of them here, when they really now go into whatever explosion protection or ceramics or really complex markets, they have to use firms like us in order to actually go down to the real knowledge that they don't have in house. So that's really what we're about as a firm. And again, started in 2008. No sales force, no marketing, nothing. Word of mouth. Do a good job. Have people talk about you, and just keep growing the firm. So by summer 2010, about 2 years later, we were about 20 or 25 people. We were profitable already. We sent the first couple of people into New York. A year later, a couple of people into Hong Kong. A year later, someone into Dubai. And just hiring great people, giving them a great path, and letting them actually get on with the business, because we can't tell our people around the world how to serve clients. We just have to enable them and give them the perspective that they really want to please the clients and do well. And we're now about 250 people, and our one and only bottleneck is actually hiring and building the organization. So our internal plans, our hopes are that over the next 5 years we should probably treble in size, which means we have to find 500 people on top of the people, the attrition that we will have. So it's a huge hiring challenge, which is one reason why I'm here. So all of you are hired. But essentially, it's a new model that's emerging, and that over time, I think, if you take a 10 or 20-year perspective, will change the way professional knowledge is bought and sold. So with all due respect, of course, to consulting firms and so on, but the tsunami of change that has changed, the way, whatever, call us the Uber of knowledge or something, it's just a smarter way of connecting the two bits and pieces together than the traditional way of doing it, basically. Enough for the AlphaSights marketing block. Let me tell you how I got into what I'm doing, and perhaps in hindsight what were the mistakes I made and how we start to think about it. Probably very similar background to yourself. Did well at school, lots of parental expectations. You want to whatever please the powers that be, and you do what you're told basically. Ended up at the LSE reading economics, and then doing a master's in finance, and being, as most people were back then, this pre-internet, in between exactly two highly creative career choices. One was investment banking, the other was management consulting. Didn't know which one to go, and then I ended up going to McKinsey, which I think was the right choice for me. I felt that banking would have narrowed me down even more or something, and I felt McKinsey is a great firm and wanted to be there, and I had the chance to be there. I think I can, in hindsight, pinpoint the moment when I figured out that McKinsey wasn't the right choice for me in the long term, and that was, I joined in autumn '94, and in autumn '95, I'm in the Munich office, back then in the Kunstblock in Ottostraße, still a tiny little office. There were 300 people in Germany, about whatever, 50 or something in Munich. Now there are thousands, hundreds of that in Munich alone. And I was at about 5,000 leaflets in orange color, on which I was using the company photocopy late at night to actually copy advertising for my own little side business, which I'd started, and it was called MasterCar at the time, then became AutoScout, and then obviously became part of became what some people know it is now. So I was one of the 3 founders of MasterCar, and I did this as a side job to McKinsey, and I got more or less caught by a partner late, and I said, "Oh, Max, you're still in the office, what are you doing?" And I was like, I'm kind of avoiding that, and they noticed what I was actually doing on company property. Now I hope 20 years later, statute of limitations, and they won't come after me for stealing the ink and paper. But it made me realize, this was probably not the way the typical person behaved who wanted to become a partner at McKinsey. I think they would, use their whatever evenings differently than copy personal papers and stuff. I couldn't articulate that inkling of what it was or something, but I felt long term I'm not going to be here. Now that process was facilitated because that fellow program sends you off to business school after 2 years, so another 9 months to survive, or to survive is wrong word, but to be around. And I put my entire effort on getting into Stanford Business School, because I wanted to be away from Europe, I wanted to be on the West Coast, I wanted to be entrepreneurial, I just wanted to have a different world around me. And I think probably the single-mindedness of just actually doing one single application, was saying I'm going to nail that thing, probably was the reason why I did nail it and ended up in there, which was lucky. I had 2 pretty amazing years out there. In terms of, I get a lot of questions, what's the value of business school or something. In terms of the actual learning, it's quite limited, especially if you've read economics and finance something, and you do basic accounting 101 for the 5th time. So that doesn't help that much. But it made me, I think, number one, learn much more who I am, because I was surrounded by a lot of very, very interesting people. And you bounce off their perspective, and there were which war had the US fought at the time? The first Iraq War or something. So we had like Iraq War veterans who could like flown fighter planes or something, people from USAID who done missionary work in Africa, and all sorts of things. So it's a really, and of course, 110 McKinsey people like myself. No, not 110, 12 McKinsey people out of 110 who had applied, but 12 McKinsey people, a bunch of bankers, and so. But really, really interesting. And of course, it was the time when Google got founded, which we didn't know about at the time, but Netscape had just gone public, and Kleiner Perkins was like throwing on top of Sand Hill Road and so on. So it was very entrepreneurial and really exciting. And it made me realize that I wanted to start my own business, and that was much more my world than kind of the McKinsey world. If there are like 100 serious mistakes you can make in starting a company, we probably made 98. Everything. We raised a boatload of money from good investors, but who were as inexperienced as we were. 1999, no one knew what the internet was about. We hired 150 people, literally off the street, come in, have a seat. And we had investment banks coming in after 9 months. We had 0 revenues, we had lots of people at computers, and I still have the pitch books, like we would go public 9 months later or 6 months later even. For €500 million valuation. So that sounded good. And now the very piddly revenue that we did have came from companies like Boo.com, which you may remember because they were like the biggest traders of the .com crash. So we figured, okay, if they no longer have advertising money to spend on our side, then this thing is going to unravel. Having at that point raised about 25 million euros from Apex, Index Ventures, Borda, and Wellington Partners, something you sit there with a pretty deep hole behind you, and a board that says we want to see our money back, and the investment bankers kind of disappearing through the back door and saying, well, maybe the idea won't come around. And then I think our real MBA started. Fred and I always said we had a 30 million euro MBA. Because we actually learned how to run a business, and we let go 130 people. We went back to 20. We closed 4 of 5 European offices. We had lawsuits up to here. and you know, many sleepless nights. But it made us, I think, better as both as people, because you know, when you eat dust for years and years and years, basically, it makes you a significantly more, I think, realistically or humble person, basically. And we had to learn the hard way how to build a business that actually has a client, you know, that likes your service, that is willing to pay money, and the money is more than the cost that, you know, takes to produce the service, and you build an organization, and so on and so forth. And so we ended up essentially, you know, having started off in the supposed online e-commerce world with a Ciao consumer portal where people would go and click through, and then, you know, lots of e-commerce conversion would come our way. We ended up 3 years later in the online market research industry, which we didn't even know existed. Because we figured out the people in our database were actually extremely willing to take surveys from the market research industry. And so we very quickly over the years became actually the largest European player in having that one time, which we didn't know then, seismic shift of data collection for market research, which had been done traditionally in the offline world, like people in pedestrian zones dragging in and saying, you know, have you got 10 minutes and fill out something with pen and paper. That process was shifting onto the internet, and, you know, people send out large email service into databases such as ours, and we would have people either realistically or pretending to be who they claim to be, and then answering these questions online. And that business became a very, very fast-growing business, and so that by 2004, we were doing about 20 million euros in revenues, which by then was, you know, kind of a nice number, at an EBIT margin of about 50%, so we almost did 10 million in EBIT or something. And had a US company knock on the door and saying, you know, we just went public on NASDAQ, and, you know, what you're doing is great, we do the same thing in the US, let's go together. And it looked like a match made in heaven. Of course it wasn't, and that was probably about the 98th mistake we made. Perhaps last few comments, and, you know, ask questions then, please. The advice we're beginning to give to people, and how I probably think back of all the mistakes I made, is not to approach the world, you know, when you graduate, saying, okay, like a kid in the candy store, you know, I'd like it to be a little bit entrepreneurial, and a brand name would be nice, so mommy knows where I'm working, and, you know, I don't want to work too long hours, and lifestyle should be good, and, you know, you can almost like build your little, you know, bouquet of flowers of what you'd like to have. Reality is, you know, no career is like that. You have to learn to compromise. And I think, how do you identify what compromises you should accept is by totally reverse engineering your perspective. Don't think through your own eyes like, you know, little Johnny wants to have a job. Think through, employers are paying you the minimum amount they can pay you in order to get you. I mean, it's a brutal transaction, you know. Cut all the gloss on marketing, you know, on recruiting and campus and, you know, whatever they tell you. Ultimately, McKinsey and Goldman and AlphaSights attitude that we pay what we need to pay in order to get a smart brain through the door. You know, that's the premise, unfortunately, how the market works. So think through it like that. And then ask yourself the question, what is the market actually paying for in little Johnny? I think there are 4 generic differences in what you actually, the deal with the devil you're entering into, that are quite distinct. And I think if you figure out which one of those 4 is the least unpleasant or most pleasant to you personally, because it is how you are and how you work, you'll make a much better decision than if you kind of, you know, stand in the candy store and try to pick things together and then read every website and say, oh, they said entrepreneur, and I thought it would be entrepreneur. No, it isn't entrepreneurial. Oh, sorry. So what are these 4 paths? I think the first one is, what does the market pay for in you, is ultimately subject matter expertise or specialization. And that's the path. You study law, you study engineering, you study accountancy, medicine, yeah? So there's a huge body of knowledge, hundreds of years old. You now, as little Johnny, you know, imbue that knowledge into yourself, and at some point people tell you, you have a qualification, and, you know, you're a doctor, or you're a, you know, whatever, lawyer, and, you know, that's why there's the bar exam, and this exam, and those exams, and all the qualifications. It's essentially just the market essentially giving a little tick to you, or to Johnny, that he has now reached that level of proficiency that he can sell himself or herself out in the market. It also means that it's very clear why, you know, whether you're 3-year qualified or 2-year qualified or erste Staatsexamen, zweite Staatsexamen, all these things are nothing but signals to the market where you stand and how much value essentially you produce and can command. The next path we call, you know, again, what is the market paying for? Organizational alignment, or even worse, organization assimilation. And that's in my view the path I trotted down. I'll skip the 3rd path because that's ultimately what we believe our path is. I'll come to the 4th path. The 4th path, again, what is the market paying for? Creativity or true originality. And that's literally the people who don't have a career and they don't have a CV, but they end up being Richard Branson or Steve Jobs because they're ultimately truly creative. And they create something that, you know, they probably didn't even think about the fact that they're creating something, but they studied calligraphy and, you know, they connected the dots and you know, something came from it. And they're the people also when we hire some of them, they're coders, I would put like today, coders, not engineers in the sense of computing science, but people who would just hack and who do the web technology. So they're often very, very creative. Or designers, or authors, or journalists, or filmmakers, or you name it. It's this talent. Most of that ends up in whatever Berlin, looking cool and not earning a single cent. But some of them come out and are the stars we all look up to and admire. So I think what is driving those people, they don't have a fear of life, they just have a passion for something, and they also don't care about expectations and societal pressures or something. And in my analysis, they typically come from either extreme of the socioeconomic spectrum, either very, very kind of orphans like Larry Ellison, Steve Jobs, no parents, nothing, nothing to lose basically. You're happy there, or nothing basically to lose in the sense Daddy has cared for everything. Richard Branson comes from a very wealthy family. Stelios, the guy who started EasyJet, very wealthy family. So you can, I think, play there if you're not coming from the kind of constricted middle, and we say, well, better do a job. So that is 3 parts, and that leaves the question, what's the last one? We call it, what's the market pain for our firm, and in most startup companies and in most sales organizations, ultimately commercial execution. We don't care what you wear or whether you laugh at our jokes or whatever when you work at AlphaSights, but we know exactly, and you know exactly what you're bringing in. And it's a very, very transparent and fair system. And essentially, you scale yourself over time by just getting better and better and better at serving clients, at running teams, at bringing in business, and you just become someone who ultimately stands on their own personal feet, not the business card we give them. And that include our firm in that, include most startup companies in there, where you have a commercial role, you're trying to make things. And I think the skills you pick up there, if you take after 2 years a stab and a look at these skills, they're hard to describe. Communication skills, whatever, a little bit of team skills or something. Over 5 years, we don't have better words for them, but you know it when you see someone, an innate leader, someone who can inspire people, who can read people, who can recruit people, Those are who can deal with clients, who walks into a hedge fund, billion-dollar hedge fund in the middle of London, just as if he was walking to get his sandwich at lunch or something. And those are the skills, that you pick up, I think, if you work in the right commercial environment and where it's a fair deal in a good firm. You end up being a very, very confident person. And either stay in that path, by joining other high growth companies or so, or, and I think that's probably a little bit that what we hope most people will do from us is actually then have the courage and jump into the 4th path again, into the originality path, by saying, okay, I may not be truly original as a designer or something, but I can spot a designer when I see one, and I can hire one, and I can put things together, and I can deliver a creative solution to the marketplace in the sense of a new company, for example. So that's really, yes, I'm out of time. that's how we believe, or how we counsel people to start thinking about their career choice. And if that resonates at least with some of you, then it's been hopefully worthwhile. I'll shut up.